Aloha and welcome to Evolving Mission Partner Networks to Enhance Warfighter Capability, a dispatch from TechNet Indo-Pac 2022, brought to you by GDIT. I'm your host, George Jackson, here in Honolulu, Hawaii. The U.S. has devoted more military personnel and resources to the Indo-Pacific region than any time in recent history. The mission partner environment is a dynamic and changing landscape. New ties for new nations, facing new challenges, and looking for new opportunities to enhance command and control capabilities. That's where MPEs come in. Today, perspectives and insight on that growing priority. First up, Brigadier General Mark Miles, Director of J6 for INDOPACOM, and Eric Tapp, Business Development Senior Manager for GDIT. So, General, Eric, let's just jump right in. There's a lot of ground to cover. I joined the opening keynote today. Your colleague, General Rudd, said MPE will be critical to our ability to fight and win in the Indo-Pacific. To kick off this program, sir, if you would, give us a sense of that landscape. What are the unique challenges to the Indo-Pacific arena? Where does MPE fit into that discussion?
Okay, well, thank you, George. First of all, honored to be here today, and I appreciate the opportunity to take part in this discussion. So, MPE, Mission Partner Environment. First of all, I want to kind of define what that is, and then go into what it means to us here in INDOPACOM. I want to focus on the environment piece of it. So, the Mission Partner Environment is how we coordinate and collaborate with our many allies and partners here throughout the Pacific, and it's critical to everything we do from day to day, and I'll go more into detail of kind of what it means here in a minute. But it's also, so it's made up of many different mission partner networks. So changing the last word there, and a mission partner network really is how we communicate with another particular network. So all of those networks together make up the environment. So it's critical to us here in the Pacific because everything we do involves our allies and partners in working together. So one of the challenges that we have, or one of the things that makes this unique, is the environment we're operating in. So let's talk about threats to that environment here in the Indo-PACOM region. And really with those threats, we got to look at what phase of conflict that we're in. So are we in the competition phase? Are we in a conflict? Or are we in a crisis there in the middle? So I'll tell you, on the networking side, we day to day are already in an arena of conflict. So that, on the cyber side, and that is with threats that we have in the Indo-Pacific region, and they are vast, but that is just threats that are inherent to cyberspace. As we transition as a military force, that affects us in the competition phase. So the overall, so we are in the overall competition phase of how we approach the operational environment here in the Pacific. We've already, we're doing that day-to-day interaction, that day-to-day conflict with not only your traditional nation-state adversaries, but with anybody that wants to, that has a bone to pick, or really anybody that opposes the free and the open information sharing that we rely on as a nation, the rules-based international norms, that really not only govern cyberspace, but really make not only our nation strong, but make our partners' ability, our partners strong and help us support that environment. So. So that is, every day in the competition phase, as we transition to a crisis or a conflict, that problem becomes tougher, especially, and it becomes tougher on the MPE networks. I imagine we'll talk about that here more as we go through the other questions. I hope I answered your question there.
Absolutely, sir. Yeah. Eric, sounds like a very complex, a dynamic landscape that the general lays out there. What does the IT side of that equation look like?
So, under the current net-centric construct, you have very much a similar architecture that we've had for the last 20 years. You have bilateral networks that are limited in their ability to communicate, very limited to one or a few partners. And that is really where data-centric technologies can really benefit the warfighter. When you look at things like ICAM, data tagging, digital access control policies, to really allow us to streamline and enhance the interoperability, using those technologies, we can start to move towards a more persistent and widespread network of mission partners that are engaging in that competition phase, so that we are a little more prepared and better situated from a network position in the event that we have to go into crisis or a conflict phase.
What does that look like at the tip of the spear, General? What is like the end state of what the service is trying to accomplish via MPEs?
Really, it is building those relationships and working closer with our partners. And that's really what the environment and the mission partner networks that make up that environment support and enable for us.
What about strategic shifts in the region? What are you tracking? What are some of your high priority or key areas of focus right now?
That's a great question. So a couple. So I'll give you two strategic shifts. So one is a shift from real boundary security that we've done in the past to more a data-centric security environment. That's a shift in how we build networks. It's a shift in how we secure networks. It's a shift in how we govern networks. And also, it's going to allow us, working with many of our great industry partners, to put security methods and systems in place that allow us to share across multiple networks as we build them. So I think that's the key strategic shift from how we build it. From how we architect networks, the other shift is really thinking through that data, that important data security, and where are we storing the data, and where is that data being processed? So where is the tough processing being done on that data? And that's really, that factor is something that largely makes this INDOPACOM theater unique when compared to some of the other challenges around the globe, because the distances we have here and the threats that we face that could potentially require us to have our data closer and have the processing of that data be closer. So as we do shift and look at our future strategy on how we handle data, where it's being stored and how close that storage is to where a conflict may take place, and then where the key processing of that data occurs is something we're thinking through and changing and challenging our current assumptions on now.
A lot of water in the region there, Eric. As he mentions storing and processing of data, a phrase comes to mind: speed of operations. Is that part of the end state the General's talking about here? Just data fueling faster decisions to folks like the General and his counterparts?
Absolutely. Data ubiquity is what you want to strive for. That data that you can access regardless of your location, regardless of the locality of that data, just being able to access it quickly and have the necessary processing available to aid in making sense, so that it is actionable information for commanders, so that they can make those decisions faster. Because in this environment that we're in, even though there are vast distances, now we're starting to talk about things like hypersonics. Decision cycles are going to shrink, and it is absolutely necessary to have, like General Miles said, have that processing capability near the warfighter. Even though we talk about cloud and that we tend to want to talk about centralization, in this environment, it absolutely has to be hybrid in nature and decentralized, so we can push that capability furthest to the edge.
Does that data ubiquity phrase mean something to you as well, General? I was watching you out of the corner of my eye while Eric was giving that response, and something resonated in there for you.
Yeah, I think it goes with my earlier comment about being data-centric as opposed to boundary-centric. So, and I'll give you one example for historically, as a career communicator, we in every operation, as every initiative, we think through PACE plans. What our primary, our alternate, our contingency, our emergency communications means is, historically, that has been about what pathways, like how would I communicate? If my fiber went out, is there a SATCOM? Is there a radio? Is there an HF way to communicate? More and more, in addition and on top of that, you think through the data piece now. So I've got full under my primary way I want to go to war, execute a war plan. I would pass X amount of data, which is usually a lot, including your full motion video, including your logistics data, including everything. So, thinking through the data pace plan of, okay, well, if the pipes were smaller, what's my alternate? Like, what do I communicate? How have I prioritized my data so I communicate given what the environment that I'm able to transmit data? And then at that extreme of that, if I'm over a radio link or if I'm over a very low bandwidth environment, what is the no kidding, the bottom of my pace plan of I have to communicate the following in order to conflict? And I think that goes into the data ubiquity of thinking through how that data, what data I need, and where is it located, and then how does it integrate into how I execute.
Eric, back to MPEs. How are the scope of those MPEs changing?
I think that as we look at the next generation, we are going to see a shift, and we are seeing a shift from information sharing networks that were kind of focused at that operational and strategic level to one where we want to get to a global warfighting network with mission partners incorporated and completely integrated into it. And I think we're seeing that because we've got, at the strategic level, you have people like organizations like MPCO that are working on the top level. You've got COCOMs that are working on the operational level. And you have the services that are working to integrate partners at the tactical level. So you're seeing it at all echelons. And that is what's going to get us to that unified global warfighting network with partners built in from day one, so that if we have to go to war, that we're using the environment that was built during peacetime and we've trained on it, and allowing us to then transition seamlessly as a unified fighting force.
I'll note, General, your background includes a lot of engineering, degree from Carnegie Mellon. Cybersecurity is a big part of your professional background, and there's a real import to MPEs on keeping that data, its life cycle, very secure. Could you talk a little bit about that component, where it falls in your larger priority chain?
Oh, it's critical. The being confident in the security of the data is critical, and using those relationships, whether it be exercises or just normal collaboration with our partners, allows us to not only execute those relationships and to build confidence in those networks, but allows us to continue to take cycles on how we're securing it and ensuring that security is not only adequate, but is in accordance with a lot of the emerging principles. Again, to go along with the data centricity, it goes with the zero trust concept of how we secure the data. So very much looking at where is the data located, who should access that, how can I prove it's coming from a trusted person on a trusted platform, and that they, again, have the rights and privileges to access the data where it is. And then that fundamentally drives how you build the networks, or as how we evolve the networks that we currently use to coordinate with our partners and allies.
I could stay with you for a moment. And Eric, I'd love for you to weigh in here too in just a moment, but is automation part of the long-term vision for those elements? It just sounds to me like this could be so complicated, and having machines in the loop there with decisions being made by human beings ultimately, but having that as sort of a backbone or enabler to MPEs, is that part of the discussion?
So automation in terms of
being able to determine who has access to what when,
Right.
how they have access to it.
Right, and that is a little bit of artificial intelligence in a way. So making those determinations, I mean, that is machines making access decisions dynamically on the fly. So absolutely, in that way, it's automation. But that also enables us to ensure that only the data that needs to be available and accessed which allows us by then extension to be more efficient as we're dealing with environments where maybe some of the access is more limited.
Tie a bow on this for us, Eric. I mean, JADC2 is something that also comes to mind. I'm sure it'll come up later on during the course of this program, but what about automation, decision-making relative to MPEs and how that ties into JADC2?
So I think MPE is an excellent model for overall JADC2 because in the end, JADC2 is about how well we share information amongst ourselves and amongst our partners. So when you start on the MPE side, you're starting with those partners. All of those lessons learned are directly applicable to all of the other domains, all of the security domains, NIPR, SIPR, TS. You can apply the technologies and streamline the data across all of those levels, both east-west and north-south. And that's how we're going to achieve success in the mission partner arena, and then that's going to facilitate success in the remainder of JADC2.
Eric, General, thanks for carving out a little time here in Honolulu for us. Really great to host both of you.
Thanks, George.
Absolutely.
Up next, the role of distributed communication in the Indo-Pacific, enhancing data-centric capabilities, and more. You're watching Evolving Mission Partner Networks to Enhance Warfighter Capability, a dispatch from TechNet Indo-Pac 2022 on GovExec TV. Welcome back. As you've just heard, Mission Partner Environments, or MPEs, seek to improve collaboration, speed up access to critical data, and make that process more secure, all at the same time. What underpinnings make that possible? Let's find out. Here today, Colonel Liz Casely, 1st Corps Communication G6 Director. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Her colleague, Colonel Adam Sanderson, Director of Plans, G5 with the 1st Corps. Thanks for being here, sir.
Happy to be here.
And Eric Tapp, Senior Management, Business Development, GDIT. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
So, Colonel Sanderson, kick off this conversation. Give us some framing. What is so unique about the Indo-Pacific region? How does it impact the work that you do on a daily basis?
So there's quite a few things, right? So if you just talk geography, it's 52% of the Earth's surface. And of that 52%, it's largely maritime terrain. There's a series of archipelagic features. Some of them, like Indonesia, stretches, would be wider than the continental United States. So that's this geography of that aspect, right? If you add in the environment, that's the other piece that we have to face. We don't need an adversary to complicate our communications in the region. This is a harsh and unforgiving environment. We have typhoons, seismic activity, monsoon season, all of these things coupled with the geography make it really hard to communicate across the region. And then, adversarially, there's several challenges that are mentioned in the National Security Strategy are resident to the Indo-Pacific region. And we contend with all of those, plus the environment, plus the geography. And then finally, I would say we don't have a NATO-like structure in the region. We won't be getting a NATO-like structure in the region. Most of the countries are not seeking something like that. So our arrangements tend to be bilateral, and then on occasion, multilateral for singular purposes. Sometimes it's, your Republic of Korea, the Japanese, and the United States. Sometimes you add in the Australians. Sometimes you have different partners that come and go for specific reasons. And because of that, we don't have a standardization like you have in NATO, with standardized data, standardized logistics, standardized munitions. All of those things kind of make it a little bit more challenging, and so we have to accommodate that.
Casely, as we further map this out, let's also start by giving the audience a sense of what your office does, how you work with Colonel Sanderson. Talk a little bit about that delineation of responsibilities.
Absolutely. So my responsibility as the G6 of First Corps is to enable the Corps to be theater relevant, not just as a tactical corps, but potentially as a CJ-FLIC, so a Combined Joint Land Forces Component Command, a portion of a JTF, so a Joint Task Force, or a JTF proper. The way I complement what Colonel Sanderson is talking about is the challenge with those vast distances actually display themselves in the virtual environment. So from an access perspective, so access to the appropriate architecture in order for us to communicate those distances, latency, the ability for your comms or your communication architecture to arrive from point to point and move data around, those create challenges in the Pacific. And then for his last point, like not having that formal NATO structure that creates standardization, what this leads us to is becoming more physical and more net-centric in the way we deliver communications. So instead of being able to connect to something that is logical, when you pick up your phone, you don't care where you are or what you're doing, you just look for Google or some other internet resource.
Sure.
For us, if it's a physical delineation, it makes it a little bit more challenging for how we deliver those services in order to compete in the region.
Colonel, based off of that, talk about this concept of distributed nodes, some of the work that you're doing there.
Absolutely. So we're pretty excited about it. About a year ago, General Brunson, the current First Corps commander, was trying to map out a predictable way to participate in the just density of activities that occur across the region. And what we ended up doing was, as we were whiteboarding this out in his office in Guam in a monsoon, was figuring out that traditional command and control CPs, command posts, they don't fit this region. They're too large, they're too static, and we don't have the transportation to get them into the region. And that's certainly true in crisis or conflict. So the competition for strategic lift is a premium, and you need to accommodate that. So what the end result of this discussion was a series of nodes, multiple nodes, that stretch from basically the continental United States all the way into mainland Asia, that can provide pieces of command and control for the Corps. They're not co-located. They may be several thousands of miles apart because we maintain a node at home station. And collectively, we provide the same command and control resources that we would if we were all sitting together. But we're more agile, more resilient, more survivable. If you lose a node, whether it's from environmental impacts or kinetic strike, that doesn't take down the core command and control capability. It impacts it, it degrades it somewhat, but we've developed this concept so that we can maintain continuous command and control in the face of environmental or adversarial activities.
Colonel, I want to come to you on the science of that distributed node concept, but Eric, before I do, DoD, federal civilian government, often are criticized for not being innovative enough, being bleeding edge or leading edge. This concept that Colonel Sanderson lays out here to me seems to be way in front of anything that I've heard before. Am I reading that right? Is this really ahead of the curve?
It absolutely is. And when you look at what's now in the realm of the possible with identity credentialing and access management, with data tagging, with digital access control policies. We can know who's on the network, where they're at on the network. We can control what they have access to on the network. And it really doesn't matter where the data's at or where that individual is at, as long as they're connected and we know about who they are and we know the classification of that data. We can protect, we can ensure that that data is available for decision makers and leaders wherever they're at the moment that they need it.
Talk about some of the technological underpinnings there, Colonel. What are the key challenges that you need to address from a technology perspective?
So for us to operate in that distributed manner that Colonel Sanderson just described, you need a network to connect it. That network needs to be online, available, and assured. And you need to have multiple different means by which you can connect. And so the idea that we would disperse into lighter, smaller, more survivable nodes would mean that we would want to have a wide range of options by how we might connect. So that's the first thing, and I think in that I'm addressing transport, so the roads that connect each of those nodes. The second thing that I would address is the services that we want to ride over that transport. Today, the service architecture that we have in place does not support dispersion, not to the degree that we expect to execute it in the Pacific. Services are designed in this client-server architecture that requires close proximity. So that's why it lends to a more doctrinal sit temp of a main TAC rear. However, we understand, based on what Colonel Sanderson just said, that that large presence in the Pacific is not supportable. So the idea here is so dispersion is not new, but uncoupling your warfighting functions, information systems, and dispersing those is. And so the idea is, how do we take that and create the network architecture along with the resident services to support that? In this discussion, I haven't even gotten to the data layer, which is what Eric just referred to, which is how do we now start to move away from physical separation to logical separation? How do we move from net-centric to data-centric, and then start to use things like ABAC, RBAC, and identity management in order to understand who you are, what access you have to the data, what you're doing with the data, how you're sharing it. And that starts to bring together some of the challenges that we experience by not having that standardization that you would normally have in other environments.
Colonel Sanderson, today's keynote address, I was almost surprised at how central MPE was to the strategy of the Indo-Pacific region. He said it'll be critical to our ability to fight and win. He mentioned inextricably linked to JADC2, Joint All-Domain Command and Control. Can you weave those two elements, this larger JADC2 focus for DoD and MPE?
I can actually. So in fact, at our panel that we spoke at just an hour ago, we referenced CJADC2, which is Combined Joint All-Domain Command and Control. And in this environment, we don't operate on interior lines. We operate through a network of allies and partners. And if we're not incorporating them into the environment, the collaborative command and control environment that we're trying to develop, then we're excluding them, and that's not going to add to our ability to operate freely in this region. So the mission partner environment, I think, is foundational to our ability to incorporate our partners at point of need, into whatever operational framework, whether it's humanitarian assistance and disaster response, major conflict operations, counterterrorism operations. You can take your pick. The necessary framework that the mission partner environment allows us to incorporate these partners fluidly, tagging them to the right data that they're allowed to see, and using. I won't even begin to explain that. That's beyond my purview. But we will operate by, with, and through our partners throughout the region, and the mission partner environment is the first step to getting to accomplishing that.
Eric, one thing that was also called out in that keynote address relative to mission partner environments is the partnership with industry. And the speaker mentioned three things there: cloud to the edge, cross-domain priorities, assured C2. Where is the community's focus in those elements right now?
I think there's some heavy focus in the identity, credentialing, access management arena. I think it's becoming a little more well known that is something that's drastically needed, not only across the DoD, but also to better incorporate our partners. Also, when you start to talk about extending capability to the edge, you've got to incorporate cloud, whether that's commercial cloud, off-prem, or a hybrid cloud where the DoD organization owns some of that capability and it's on-prem. So those are two areas that industry is really heavily looking at. There are also some policy challenges associated with bringing mission partners into IL6 cloud that need to be addressed. But I think technologically, we're well on our way to being able to bridge that gap of distance.
Colonel Casely, I want to bring our conversation back as it begins to close here to data, what you called out earlier. You know, after that March test in Guam that you guys referenced, you said you need something service agnostic, sensor to shooter, flat architecture, supported by cloud computing. How does data weave through all of those elements? What has to be done there?
I think from the core perspective, you need to first start with your data flows. You have to understand what information or what data you need in order to make decisions, where that data resides, what information systems it might be on, whether it's structured or unstructured, and then how you start to federate that data, kind of bring it together to produce relevant information that you can then generate courses of action on and then tee up for decisions. My responsibility there with the team the talented team that is underneath the core G6 is to figure out how to then move that data around across these distributed nodes in a way that is timely and relevant in order to inform all of what I just talked about. So course of action generation, mission analysis even, and then finally decision making. The issue that we experience at this point is the service, I would say the server infrastructure that is created by all the disparate mission command systems that have to come together to form this collective picture of what is happening in the environment. Today, to a degree, mostly exists in stovepipes of excellence. And so how do we start to now use something like a cloud-enabled environment that delivers mission command as a service that's tactically enabled, meaning that I would first go to that, which would require diverse, assured, agnostic transport. But I would first go there and then go to my on-prem device for what I need to process locally. All of that is definitely a challenge, but we understand at the core that the role we play is understanding what our data flows are and how we're making decisions. Because what we recognize is that we don't need everything everywhere. And so replication now is the delta of what is required, not necessarily total replication.
Colonel Casely, Colonel Sanderson, Mr. Tapp, thanks for being here all.
Pleasure.
It's our pleasure.
GDIT is setting the standard of cybersecurity across the DoD. Introducing the Enterprise Identity, Credential, and Access Management solution for today's defense customers. GDIT is bringing together industry-leading technologies to provide a secure, trusted capability where people and systems can dynamically secure access to critical mission resources. ICAM enables strong, flexible authentication anywhere, whether in the cloud or on the front lines, providing authorization services with role-based access and facilitating better and faster audits of users and resources. How do we do it? With ICAM, we are harmonizing disparate sources of information to bring meaning and confidence to user identity. We are fielding advanced capabilities to authenticate the user, building on DoD's security architecture while anticipating advances in AI and data analytics. And we are tying it all together with a self-service push-button deployment experience that streamlines management of a complex enterprise. In today's cyber environment, where assets are highly distributed, securing identity and access have never been more important. ICAM is a critical pillar of the DoD's cybersecurity strategy and its ultimate push toward a zero-trust architecture. Secure your success with ICAM, powered by GDIT. GDIT Cyber. Secure today, smarter tomorrow.
That's it for the MPE portion of today's program. I hope you learned more about the strategic importance of the Indo-Pacific theater and where secure collaboration comes in. As Colonel Casely just mentioned, data is key to all of those efforts. For the Department of Defense, shifting from data to insight to action requires security every step of the way. Now, a bonus session from TechNet Indo-Pac 2022 on ICAM, Identity, Credential, and Access Management. Joint and coalition forces are connecting more battlefield devices, leveraging more sensor data than ever before. The next generation will be ICAM at the edge, automated, resilient, and secure. Joining me, Bob Sholtis, Deputy ACS G39 and G6, U.S. Marine Forces Pacific. Welcome, sir.
Good morning. Great to be here.
John Sahlin, Director of Cyber Solutions at GDIT. Good to see you, sir.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Last but not least, Chuck White, Chief Technology Officer for Fornetics. Welcome.
Aloha.
So, Bob, kick us off here. ICAM, how do you work with it? Why is it important to the Indo-Pac region?
So setting the stage just a little bit, you look at Marine Forces Pacific, where we are here in sunny Honolulu, and you look at where our forces are located that are assigned to us, right? So we have 1st Marine Expeditionary Force in Camp Pendleton. You have 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force out in Okinawa, and you look at, you basically have 2/3 of the Marine Corps' combat power assigned to this AOR. And so as you look at the challenges that the tyranny of distance and just the sheer number of Marines we have on the deck in every climate and place of this AOR, we have challenges, and we ask a lot of our network. We ask it to talk to allies and partners. We ask it to be able to deploy on the backside of a Navy's ship. We ask it to work in Marine Rotational Forces Darwin in Australia. We ask it to work off the backside of host nation capabilities. And so as we look at how we employ ICAM, right now I would say we're mostly, in a lot of cases, restricted to IDAM, Identity Access Management. And so that's challenging from how we share data on the battlefield, because as my panel members will advise me, that place is, we take security and we use it as a blocking mechanism. And when you don't own the full end-to-end string, that becomes really challenging. And so we think of security last, right? How are we going to apply security to this network, instead of looking at security being a driver and being able to be how we and utilize security to share data, with our partners and allies. And so we have a long way to go, but I think we're approaching a tipping point, and we'll be getting there.
John, what about cybersecurity generally? Some of your colleagues in this space from First Corps, we had a conversation earlier in the program. There's a lot of water here in the Indo-Pacific region. What kind of impact does that have on cybersecurity? Are there unique elements to the community here that you have to think about regarding cyber that you don't have to think about elsewhere in DoD?
Well, so I'm actually glad you asked that, because there are some interesting challenges with this particular AOR because of, as Bob was describing, the tyranny of distance, right? The fact that you're spread out, and the fact that you're not as certain with whom you need to share data. And I'm really glad that Bob, you brought this up, that ICAM is an enabler to share that data, because I don't think enough people think about cybersecurity as more than just a lock. Right? It is a key to enabling the mission if we use it right. And what you were describing is dead on in how we make cybersecurity in general a mission enabler. But with this particular AOR, the fact that you've got everybody's spread out, and the tactical situation will change. That means with whom we need to share data and where we need to pull data will change, because we may have new sensors or platforms come into the area with relevant data, and we need to be able to ingest that and make use of it for our Marines on the ground very quickly. And we don't have the time to reach back to some terrestrial network enterprise to allow us to do that. We have to extend the ability to use those credentials and make decisions on the fly in field.
Yep. It's worth it. On top of that, from an operational perspective, if you consider what, all the connectivity issues that John brought up are spot on. The nature of the AOR has been brought up is spot on. You also have probably one of the most sophisticated threat actors also in this AOR that has done a number of things, including has supplied some of our partners with technology. So you now have this dynamic environment where how much you trust entities that we would be interacting with, other, our mission partners in the region. And when you're joining those technologies together, what you might do with a partner like Australia might be very different than what you do with other partners in Southeast Asia. And that adds a dynamic you don't see anywhere else where outside of INDOPACOM.
Governance is a spectrum, and there's this huge focus, not just in DoD, not just in the Indo-Pacific, but in all of public sector on zero trust right now. Supply chain security, using automation and authentication more effectively. Conversations that I've been having in the hallways here this week, people talk about keys, talk about certificates as table stakes right now. Am I reading that right, Chuck?
You are, and that's for a number of reasons. One, it's fundamental to non-person entities. Two, particularly on the supply chain side, the industry has become far more sophisticated in how they can enable controls all the way down to the silicon level, which once again involves PKI. So now you're seeing this ability to have a foundation of trust starting at hardware, no matter what virtual container microservice you have. There's eventually something physical is there in the stack at some point, but that, lack of better words here, the boxology, that's something I heard from Major General Jeff Ray. The boxology now has a fundamental ability for attestation, and that's driven by PKI, and that's driven effectively to be identity for devices, non-person entities, which, whether they're sensor platforms or the basic compute you're using to run, C5 ISR type applications, that ties into this idea of ICAM is for more than just for people, but when it does go machine side, it's very driven by cryptography.
What's cutting edge in the current threat environment? What are you dealing with? What can you actually talk about there?
So as we look at things like DISAPAC and what they're able to do, looking operationally at the entire network, right? And we look at what it takes for someone to have eyes on a fuel farm and be able to ensure that the information coming in and out of that is secure. Being able to sense for anomalies and make sure that the traffic that is passing over that network is the traffic that ought to be passing. We're gaining better insight into that, and to be able to prioritize in this vast AOR, which are the circuits that are important, which are the priority ones, and divvy them up between the Marine Corps Cyber Operations Group, the MCOG, and DISAPAC, and figure out who owns what, and then understand where our vulnerabilities are. And we're doing a much better job of that.
John, that's being used more and more is ICAM at the edge. Define that for our audience.
So, ICAM at the edge can mean a lot of things, because how you define the edge is a core element of this. An edge could be a vehicle, it could be a platform, it could be a MUSOC, right? So there are varying degrees of edge. It's a series of layers.
Exactly.
Right? And how you field ICAM capabilities to those different layers of edge will determine to what degree you push capability. And the core element of ICAM, the C, that makes ICAM different from just identity management, is making decisions about allowing access to resources based on identity, but more than just identity. Telemetry information. Where is this person or non-person entity coming from? What kind of a network are they using? How are they behaving? Are they behaving in a way that is normal for how that user or that sensor or that device is testing itself? And if it is, I make some decisions. So at some layers of the edge, I may want to put that kind of decision capability to that level. At more granular levels, it may simply be look at identity and make a decision whether I'm going to allow it or not. So how much of the C management of ICAM you push to the edge depends on that definition.
Bob, jump in there.
So I would just add that we see capabilities at strategically located in the first island chain, things like advanced compute capabilities. And we know there's going to be a time and place where we're not going to be able to connect that device outside of the first island chain. And so having those capabilities resident, at least at that echelon and below, is going to be critical to us.
And it's probably worth addressing and just making sure when you think about this, some of the why of why would you do this, and that goes back to your point as well, is when you, the package of ICAM that you deploy is going to be driven by what you're identifying and connecting to it. I'm reminded of my time when I was in the Army in counterintelligence. I would rate sources, based by their credibility, and general reliability. ICAM, the why of ICAM at the edge is if I'm connecting partners, technologies, services, anything, I can have more, I can trust it more, because at least I have mechanisms in place as a foundation to establish and build trust. So the why becomes really driven by the mission, and it's ultimately to make the services, technologies, people, process, etc., more credible. And then doing it in a way that allows you to be interoperable, while at the same time, still, to your point, being in cybersecurity as a mission enabler versus a hurdle.
Chuck, that foundation, you use the word interoperable. How interoperable do the services, do these organizations need to be for ICAM to be effective? Or is that a lot of the blocking and tackling that goes on right at the outset of a larger project like these?
Interoperability is an absolute touchstone for ICAM. It has to be. We have tried in the past, when interoperability wasn't even a thing. And if you throw enough money at the problem, you can solve it. However, and that's the blocking and tackling, everyone has come to realize having these interchangeable blocks of technology that build up the ICAM allow you to address conditions on the ground. Rip and replace is a tactical blunder from any way, shape, or form, so you don't want to do that. It allows you to address mission packages on the why the ICAM needs to be there. And so, but all of that is ultimately driven by how interoperable are these system of systems that are building up what is the ICAM. And that really drives the point. ICAM definitely, in the entire zero trust universe, absolutely, they're team sports. Nobody has a complete solution. So technology vendors have components, and you need partner like what John and the team at GDIT are doing or demonstrating. Yes, industry has made it easier to put the blocks together. However, you still need to put the blocks together, and so it'll be a continual bit of both people, process, and technology that is driven by interoperability to make this all work.
Your job. You know, at the top of the program, you talked about this 2/3 of the Marines' combat power between Pendleton and Okinawa. You're charged with getting information to the tip of the spear. How do you balance that priority with security? Give our office, you know, some best practices here.
So this is a relationship business, right? It's built on trust. It's being able to trust the commanders, that they understand the risks. But what we've done here in our AOR is we've built a bridge between us and DISAPAC. We built that bridge between us and Marine Forces, the McCall. And so as we built the bridge between those two organizations, and we informed them of the operations we're going to execute, where we're going to execute them, and have an understanding of where the risks are in that network, we've been able to now give the commanders a better understanding and trust that when the time comes for them to deliver effects, that we won't be pulling out the network from under them. And so it's a one team, one fight mentality. And if you don't have a liaison with DISAPAC, and you don't have a liaison with the folks that are running your network, then you're most likely to run into problems at the critical time and place when you need to be delivering effects.
Chuck, something resonated in there for you. Jump right in.
So more of a thought process, and it's sort of having a memory back, but when we all served like in Afghanistan and Iraq, the cyber threat component wasn't there. The threat conditions have changed such that now adversaries are far more sophisticated. And if you're at the edge, if you are the Y of ICAM, that comfort for commanders, understanding that our command and control capabilities are trusted, they're, you know, that at the same time, they become means for us to connect our partners, once again on the interoperability thing, you know, because it's not, the interoperability thing is not just about technology, it's about also on the people and process side, being able to integrate our mission partners so that we can bring them into these environments faster and maintain a C2 advantage versus adversaries in the region.
John, tie a bow on this program for us. What did we miss as you advise folks all across DoD on bringing ICAM to the edge? What do they take on first?
I say what you take on first is identifying, like Bob is describing, how to push that decision point to the commanders in situ and inform them on how to make those decisions, right, on when and where and with whom I'm going to share data, and accept someone's identity and under what conditions. And that's what's critical about taking ICAM to the edge, is allowing that local decision point to authorize access locally. And that requires two things. It requires the ability to maintain those identities and make those decisions locally. It also requires that you participate with the enterprise when you can, when you're able, and when you need to. Sure. And that drives a federated approach so that I can work with the enterprise and accept the global identities and global policies as I need to, but then disconnect effectively and make those decisions that are tactically relevant. So it's all about putting together that federation strategy and then informing the commanders on how to use that to drive mission effects.
Sure.
John, Chuck, Bob, you've kept this ICAM audience on the edge of their seats. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To all of our speakers, thanks for joining us. And thank you, our audience, for tuning in. For the largest military theater in the world, mission priorities are shifting rapidly. I hope you leave today's program with a better understanding of the next generation for command and control, and how technology and culture need to adapt to enable secure collaboration. For GovExec TV in Honolulu, I'm George Jackson. Have a great day.